So in terms of acquisition, so you have your print collection,
Absolutely.
and then you also have this electronic collection.
Right.
So how do you go about?
You know, and that's another distinction. I don't refer to it as my print collection. I refer to it as my physical collection. Because when I think about my library, I think about a lot of electronic media that we're actually lending. We have hundreds and hundreds of titles across 7 different game platforms that we lend out in our library. We have digital media and other forms of digital information that are part of my physical collection. And so like when people talk about print collection, I don't think that's terribly valid anymore. I don't think libraries will be talking about print collections in 10 years from now, because what percentage of a library's collection should actually be on paper? I have a lot of equipment in my library right now. As Marshall and I are talking, I'm looking at a flip camera, and in my library to my students I lend out 8 flip cameras on a regular basis, because they're going to be making YouTubes, they're going to be creating their own media. And so when I look at a flip camera, that's part of my collection. So it's my physical collection as opposed to print. Because when I look at the dollars in my budget in terms of how I spend, it's a pretty equal split right now in terms of physical items, what's actually print and what's everything else.
So you brought up a topic that we've been talking about on our discussion board is print dead?
No, I don't think print is dead at all. I think print is a fine form of media. I don't think print is going to go away. And I don't really think books will ever lose their value unless we can get some e-paper I can bring in the bathtub with me. Because that's really my litmus test for technology that's really going to be portable. Like, for example, if I can't comfortably read a Kindle in the bathtub, it really has no value to me as a reader if that's the environment I'm going to be reading in. And I also think that the book is just a perfect form in itself. I think they're going to continue. The print industry is going to keep going, but I think it's going to be more customized. I think you're going to see so many more books on demand. I think the real issue right now with the Google Book projects is simply that idea of owning copyright for all of these books that have been out of print, and what that means to things like print on demand and other services. So I think it's really exciting, but I think it's going to be different. Books are so much cheaper to print today too, and that's a big difference as well. If you had asked me 10 years ago if I could imagine working in a library where print on demand was just a normal part of every day, I would have thought that was crazy. I think right now, I think that more and more public libraries and larger state college and university libraries should think about print on demand, because it's not an unaffordable solution to really create a big collection of things people really want to read. And
so how do you handle weeding? Since, you've got, obviously a very current collection.
In a very small collection. Weeding is something that happens in our technology disciplines roughly every 18 months. So if I have a C# book that we're in 2009 right now in June, I would expect the oldest C# book I have in my library is from January 2008. And we do weeding on a semesterly basis. We do weeding as needed. It's incredibly important to keep our collection current. And it's also based on this frame of reference that our students have. We have students who think that information that's more than 3 years old is irrelevant. It's a faster world. Giving a student a book on programming from 1986 would be laughable. And that's just the world, that I live in.
How you had mentioned your budget. How do you work with your budget? In terms of the electronic resources, how do you figure out what to spend, where to spend?
That's a really interesting, an interesting question, because when I took over the library 4 years ago, that wasn't something that I was terribly concerned with, because there were a lot of things that I wanted to implement to get to the library, just to get the library to a place where I felt that it was meeting the primary needs of our students. in a way that fit them as technologists. So right now I'm in a place where when I look at the budget for the overall library and I look at the resources, I split my library budget based on areas where we're retaining the library and areas where we're improving the library. And I'm pretty happy to say the majority of my budget, over 50%, goes to improving as opposed to retaining, because that doesn't make any sense to me. There are certain areas of the collection that do need to be reinvigorated on a regular basis, and in terms of maintaining what we're currently doing, but in general it's about improving and looking forward and looking at future programs and being relevant and looking at what disciplines are coming up, what are the things that our students are really excited about. And a good example of that is we currently teach Japanese on our campus, and our library is expanding our language resources to include Japanese or Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and we're also looking at what we need locally. So one of the resources that we don't have enough of are Spanish language books. We're in Arizona. Learning Spanish is a need for some of our students to, live in the community. And I'm also looking at English language for adult learners, so that any of our international students really are better supported in languages. But it all started with Japanese, moved out from there.
How do you know that you're meeting the information needs of your students?
We know we're meeting the information needs of our students based on general usage metrics. For example, when I look at how students are using ProQuest, I'm always delighted when I realize that in a tech school, we're still getting hundreds of hits to women's studies modules in ProQuest every year. Those are the things that tell me how well our resources are being used, because I think that if I look at the outliers, at a tech school that doesn't teach a women's studies course, it's very interesting to me that those modules are also getting use. Another thing that we're beginning to implement are surveys of user satisfaction. We have two populations that we serve. We have a resident campus, and we also have an online campus. And right now, I can't distinguish satisfaction between resident and online students. I see everything as an aggregate. So we're building surveys so that I can distinguish the satisfaction of our resident versus our online students. And that's something that over time, I think I'll have a much better sense of whose needs are being met. I think that our resident students are very happy based on circulation. You can see where our collection has really high spikes of use, but with our online students, it's much more obscure. And I've spoken with and I've researched how other libraries are managing their understanding of satisfaction for online students, and there are a lot of questions everyone has. And what's also really interesting is there's a lot of assumptions a lot of librarians are making about what constitutes satisfaction in an electronic environment. Hit rate to a resource or how many full text resources are pulled from a database don't indicate how well that library is serving their online students. And that's, something that I believe and is the reason that we're sending out surveys, because surveys do two things for us. They give us a checkpoint of raising awareness that the library is there, and it also gives us that direct feedback about how are you using the library, and what additional resources are students looking for.